Before we get into the podcast episode, I just want to remind you that this conversation, so anything I share or my guests share, is really just designed to inform and educate, get you thinking about your own health. It's not designed to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure any disease, and in particular, any thyroid disease. If as a result of this conversation, you want to get something checked out, please do that with your own health professional. That's where you should be getting your individualized medical advice from. Having said that, I really hope you enjoy this conversation and that it really helps support and encourage you on your thyroid journey. Well, welcome everyone to episode 135 of the Let's Talk Thyroid podcast. We've got a different episode today. Well, they're all kind of a little bit different because I have beautiful different guests. But today we're talking all about fasting, and in particular, the fasting mimicking diet, which you may or may not have heard about, but we're going to learn all about that today with my guest today is Renee Fitton. And Renee, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to sink our teeth into this topic and no pun intended, sink our teeth into fasting and fasting mimicking.
Yeah, perfect. So Renee, tell us a little about you, what you do and what you're really passionate about in this space.
Man, well, I'm actually what I like to call a longevity dietitian. I got my master's degree in longevity nutrition, working specifically on health span and not just making people live longer, but also making them live healthier longer. You know, this really came to me probably, nearly 2 decades ago now, where I was starting to explore the world of medicine and just generally, you know, how we look to heal. I've always been incredibly passionate about science and evidence-based, even beyond nutrition, but just evidence-based science and supporting longevity and healthy aging. So I, of course, initially went into the world of medicine thinking that it was a cure-all. And I was pleased to see a lot of really incredible things that were happening in the space. But as I traveled and did medical missions and worked in an emergency room and volunteered there and spent some time just exploring this space and seeing if it was right for me, I also started seeing some things that weren't quite the right fit for me and starting to see some gaps in bringing some lifestyle changes into people's life that could really make an incredible impact in their health. And so I started just digging myself into the world of lifestyle nutrition and lifestyle changes that could support longevity. And nutrition really stuck with me. And I, of course, then ended up getting my master's degree in longevity nutrition and spending a lot of time trying to figure out how we could use nutrition to our advantage, as it is something that we can change absolutely every single day. We can adapt and use it to our advantage or our disadvantage, whichever way we choose to go with it. So yeah, it certainly piqued my curiosity for the last couple decades now. And I think that I've now worked with thousands of people leveraging certainly fasting mimicking, but also a lot of really cool nutrition practices that support us in helping us age healthfully.
Awesome. And yeah, look, I think I love what you said there about nutrition, because in the end, that is something that we've got control over. There are some things we can't always control, how toxic our environment is. There's certain things we can't control, but what we put in our mouths or not, or don't put in, is something within our control. And so, yeah, I love talking about things like this on the show because they're practical things people can do and have control over and see massive improvements. Like, I'm always amazed at people tweaking their diet has such a profound impact on someone with an autoimmune condition. So I think this will be perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it certainly is really interesting to see. I mean, the world of nutrition is definitely vast in terms of, you know, it's more than just even what we eat, but also when we eat and how we eat and who we eat with. And all of these things are part of the equation. And I always like to remind people that I'm not here to tell you exactly what you can and can't eat every single day, but rather how it all comes together and try and look for little tweaks that ideally have a really big impact. And that's the fun part is personalizing and adjusting based off of the individual so that it doesn't feel like food is such an important part of our communities, of our lives, of our stress management, of all of these pieces of our life. So it's really important that we also tweak carefully and that we handle it as, kind of its own religion,
Yeah, I always think in the end, we are our own experiment of one. And so if you're listening, and look, even as the host of the show, every guest I talk to, I think, oh, I should be doing that. Oh, I should be doing that. Oh, and I've got to be careful for myself that I'm not just, flitting from things to things. I've got to be careful what I take. And so if you're, a listener that listens to quite a lot of episodes, you don't have to take a lot from everyone. Yeah, there are some episodes you might want to leave completely alone, but I love that you can just sort of pick and choose and tweak, and over time make those individualized adjustments. And I think before we get into, because we're going to focus on fasting and fasting mimicking, and I just probably want to just say to my audience, because I've done a lot of thinking about this and talked to lots of people about fasting and read a lot, and we've talked about it different times on the podcast, that fasting when you have a thyroid condition isn't a given. It's not fasting is always good for someone with a thyroid condition. And so you do need to be careful, because in the end, fasting is a stress on the body. And if you're already in the peak stress, like you're not managing your thyroid health well, your hormones are all over the place, perhaps you haven't kind of started reining in some of that base level diet, lifestyle changes, and then you just throw in a fast of any kind, it can be too much on the body. So please just be careful. Do get proper medical help. And I know that's hard, and that's a whole nother conversation. But I just want to say that at the beginning, because I just think we've got to be careful in that autoimmune space, not to just assume that everything is okay for everyone. And it may be great for you. I'm going to share some of my own fasting experiences as we're talking with Renee. So it's certainly something I've done bits of, but just exercise common sense and a little bit of caution. And then if you're in a good spot and you're ready to dive in, I think you're going to love this conversation, because I think it's really exciting, the benefits that we can get from fasting, as part of that overall approach to our health. So I don't know if you want to say about anything I just said, Renee, from your perspective. I suppose I wanted just to put that out there from the beginning.
No, absolutely. I said amen, because I couldn't agree more. I think how you explained it is how I would explain it as well. I would add on that, as an evidence-based practitioner, the world right now of fasting for thyroid health is really, really early. There is not a lot of evidence that we can point to with any level of certainty. So sometimes in instances like this, the N of one becomes especially important, or the fact that we are our own case study, where you really do have to listen to your body, listen to your physicians, watch how your biomarkers are adapting over time, right? And make a decision for you as to when the right time to move forward is with activities like these that are still very novel for this space. I will say it's been around for a long time, but in this world right now of thyroid health, it's still pretty darn.
Yeah, and look, hopefully, I think you were saying before, there is starting to be a little bit of research in this space, which, given 1 in 8 women have a thyroid problem, I think that's fantastic, because it's a lot of, and obviously not just women, but it's a lot of people with thyroid's Hashimoto's the most common autoimmune disease is on the rise, all of that autoimmunity stuff. I love that there's a lot of research now into that autoimmune space, because I think that's what, at least the Western world, the main medical crisis is, it seems to me, is that long-term chronic health. And so if things like this can help.
Thankfully we're really starting to scratch the surface here. I can tell you, I don't know if we want to get into it right away, but there is some really cool early research in fasting mimicking specifically. Yeah. And some autoimmune conditions, like we have some preclinical work in multiple sclerosis, in IBD, even in type 1 diabetes, technically autoimmune as well. Mm-hmm. We have some early research, and the findings that we see there are, I think, why a lot of people are really excited about the opportunity for other autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's and otherwise.
Yeah. Excellent. So let's just dive in. What is fasting mimicking? What is it?
Well, so I think most people have a general sense of what fasting is, which in our dictionary definition of fasting is the absence of food. Now, the absence of food, especially when done for a significant period of time, can induce some stress, right? And it can become a safety concern, especially in individuals where there are already some concerns around stress. The fasting mimicking diet, in fact, was created originally for individuals going through chemotherapy and cancer treatments because of the possible benefit of water only fasting in this population, but the concerns around muscle loss and very low calorie diets in these individuals. And so fasting mimicking came about for this reason, to find a safer and certainly easier way to get the benefits of water only fasting. Now, many people, of course, then ask, well, how can you get the benefits of water only fasting with food? It seems completely counterintuitive. Those things don't line up. And I think what's really important to recognize is that definition, that initial definition that I introduced of water only fasting and fasting that we don't eat, is just our dictionary definition of fasting. And our cells don't actually read that same dictionary. They are determining whether we are in a fasted state or not, based off of whether or not we have certain nutrients in high enough quantities that tell it that it's time to grow and time to focus on growth instead of repair, which is the alternative when we're in this fasted state. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what fasting mimicking taps into. It looks for and it uses very specific foods in specific quantities and also in specific pairs so that we can live below those sensors at the cellular level. I kind of like to think of them like the 007 going below the laser beams that are out there. And that's the fasting mimicking diet, the 007.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and so that is that the main. So when you look at the world of fasting, and it seems to have really kind of, I know it's been around for thousands of millennia, fasting. So it's not new, but in our Western world where we all like to food and eat and everything's surrounded by food, I've got to say for me, like just even the idea of fasting, I've got to be in the right headspace for that because otherwise I just like to eat. No, and so even just the whole concept of fasting can be, what do you mean? There can be a barrier to it, but I know it's become more popularized in the last decade or so. 5-2, intermittent fasting, eat in a window, 1 meal a day. Like there's so many types of fasts. So what's the main difference then with fasting mimicking to those other styles of fasts?
It's a great question. Now, I think the first thing that I want to tap into here is actually in terms of timing. Mm-hmm. When we talk about, especially when we think about the fears around fasting, I think most people start thinking that they're going to have to fast 16, 18, 24 hours, right? Like we're very familiar with this 16, 18-hour daily fasting. And while there can be benefits to these daily fasts of 16 to 18 hours, what we typically see in terms of benefits here are going to be that your body is running out of sugar storage and it has to shift to using fat for energy. And that can be supportive for some metabolic health concerns. So we oftentimes see people talking about this for type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, things like that. And also for weight loss. So there's definitely some benefits there. But once we start increasing our fast to, especially around the 2-3 day mark, now we start seeing some added benefit. We start seeing this deep cellular activation where there's actual cleanup happening at the cellular level. Now, you mentioned, people fearing fasting. I think this is where the fear really starts kicking in. Someone tells you have to fast for 72 hours. Absolutely not. No, thank you. I would rather just deal with dirty cells. I don't know. So, this is really where fasting mimicking makes a difference. It's the ability to consume food for several days, allowing you still to tap into that deep cellular cleanup that you wouldn't even be able to tap into on these shorter fasts that might be a little bit easier to achieve in water only settings. So That's really where fasting mimicking, in my opinion, shines above the rest. Not to mention that it does, because it gives you food, it reduces some of these extra stress responses that your body releases when it is in these fasted states. And on top of that, there is muscle protection, which is really important for long-term metabolic health. So fasting mimicking kind of separates itself not only in just giving food, but also supporting with, in many cases, better outcomes.
Okay. And so what's a normal period of time for a fasting mimicking diet? Is it something that's done regularly? I mean, I know when I can share my experience, in a little bit, but I want to understand how, if someone was thinking about, well, okay, this sounds interesting, what's really involved? Like, what's involved in doing a fasting mimicking diet?
Absolutely. Well, typically a fasting mimicking diet is best used and has the best results when you are doing it for about 5 days. And you
Mm-hmm.
would do that 5-day protocol if you are a healthy individual, maybe only a few times a year. Now, there's now a lot of research leveraging this for metabolic health in various conditions. We see it right now a lot for type 2 diabetes, where in this case, the research is showing 5 days a month for 6 months in a row is kind of the sweet spot for diabetes remission and regression. So it does depend on the individual. It does depend on your goal, but you might be doing this anywhere from 2 times a year to up to 8 times a year.
Okay. Okay. And so even if you were doing it the most frequently, it's 5 days 5 days in a row out of the month, and then the rest of the month is normal eating, normal healthy eating.
Yes. And this is very important too, this normal eating piece of the equation, because I like
Mm-hmm.
to remind people that the goal with fasting is primarily a cleanup, a break, a repair and rejuvenation. I like to think of it a lot like a spring cleaning that you're doing periodically. And I also like to think of, in my spring cleaning analogy, perhaps there's in your spring cleaning some things that you realize that you notice around your house that are no longer working the way that they should be. Maybe it's your dining room chairs. You notice a bunch of the legs are really wobbly. So you're going to go ahead and chuck those and get rid of them as part of your spring cleaning. Now, you also, once you're done your spring cleaning and you've gotten rid of these things that don't work so well, need to find replacements for those that are new and improved. And that is the refeeding phase after you fast. You have to rebuild once you've cleaned things out. So,
Mm-hmm.
I oftentimes get asked by people who are going through these protocols, they feel so good at the end, maybe on day 5 and even day 6. They say, Renee, can I keep going? Can I keep fasting? And I inevitably will say, no, let's resume a regular healthy diet, ideally. All the studies actually didn't even make any recommendations on diet, but certainly a healthy diet would be
Yeah.
preferred, and rebuild and grow from this repair that we've just gone through over the last 5.
That makes sense, because when I was just doing it recently, and I can't remember if I said this online or when we were chatting before, but when the request came through to have you on the show to talk about this, I was in the middle, like literally, I think on the Wednesday of a 5-day fasting mimicking diet. And I'm like, oh, right, absolutely. I do want to talk to Renee. Like, this sounds great. I'm right. This is right where I'm at. And toward, must have been like the Thursday or Friday, I'm like, AIing, like, how is it worth continuing? Could I go for a couple of days longer? And here's what AI said. AI said, not really, don't really, the benefits will drop off. It's not really worth it. Like, maybe you could stretch it to 6 days, but really it's not, your bang for buck's not worth it. And I'm like, oh, good. All right, I'm done. I mean, I'm done on the 5 days. So there we go.
Yeah, I always like to think of it in terms of any fasting mimicking or water fasting, is that too much of a
Mm,
good thing can be a bad thing. And
yeah.
that I certainly, even with these 5 days, like, you don't want to go 10, you don't need to go 20. I mean,
Mm,
it's still a stress on your body, but certainly with the everyday fasts, that's something where you're inducing significant stress, especially if you're going 16, 18 plus hours on your body every single day.
yeah.
So I
Yeah. So
think
that's a
that
risk. Yeah.
there's a risk certainly involved. You have to weigh the risk and benefit here. And that's why for these daily fasts that are longer than 12 hours, 12 hours is an awesome time for anybody to fast. That's a circadian way of eating, and that's still technically fasting because you fasted for 12 hours. But once you start hitting over 14, that's where we start getting a little bit iffy in terms of that stress. And I would really only recommend that for people who have significant weight to lose and are looking to where the weight is the bigger problem than inducing some stress for a short period of time. And then the recommendation would be that you would then, once you've reached your goal, discontinue and go back to a regular 12-hour fast.
Yeah, I think it's sort of become almost, like it used to be, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, you shouldn't skip breakfast. Then it became this intermittent, like eating within a window. So everybody just skips breakfast and eats lunch, and that's a good thing. And I'm like, I really like breakfast. I don't want to skip breakfast. But then what I was finding for myself, and it depends on the morning routine and what have you, but I probably was just naturally fasting 14, 15 hours without really trying to, but just by the time I ate dinner and then to when I got up, got the kids to school, came back, had time for breakfast, blah, 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 was that. And just, it's been really interesting, that whole eating, like you mentioned, eating in the circadian rhythm. Yes. So I was recently on holidays, and while I'm on holidays, I'm thinking, all right, Annabelle, you've 50, you need to, you're going to start, this is my head, you're going to start putting on weight with all the perimenopause stuff, right? You've got to get ahead of the game. Like you need to, lose a few so that if you gain a few, it's okay. I didn't want to gain from where I was, so I need to lose. How am I going to do this? I'm sitting on this beautiful holiday in Western Australia, just thinking about, okay, how am I going to handle this next season of life? And it just, the fasting mimicking diet popped back into my head. And I'd done it. So I haven't done it as regularly as I know as recommended. I think the third time I've just done it. And probably the time before that must be about 3 or 4 years ago, and then maybe a year before that. So I've probably done it once a year, and then not for 4 years, and then just like 3 weeks ago. So completely irregular. However, each one of those times has been beneficial. I've been able to see that in my blood test results as well. But this time I was thinking, yeah, I can do that, but I've got to, what am I going to? I've got to do something different. I can't just gain and lose the same 2 kilos over and over and over, which is probably what I've really done for a while, long years. And so in amongst all the, I can do the fasting mimicking, but what am I going to do after that? And then I was reading just about how important it is to eat in the circadian rhythm and eating early within about half an hour of waking up. And because like probably most of my listeners are on thyroid medication, and you've got to wait 30 to 60 minutes from when you take your medication in the morning to eating. By the time that's 30, 60, I'm taking kids to school, that's how it kind of crept up. But I thought, all right, I'm going to try this. And so I've been and now my youngest child just got his license, so he's driving himself to school. So I don't have to do any of that. So I'm like, right, well, I'm awake. I've got to get up and eat. And so I spoke to my doctor about it. She said, look, as long as you give your thyroid meds 30 minutes, like you don't really have to wait the full hour. Just 30 minutes is enough. So I've been eating early, like getting up to eat, which for the first time probably since I was at school, and for this must be almost the 4th week, I have lost weight consistently the whole time. I've lost 5 kilos, which it's like, right, what's going on? And it's, so yeah, I could, like, pairing it with that, I do think that the fasting mimicking was a really good kickstart to that. And I did it as soon as we got back from holidays, when you've had lots to eat and drink. And so I wasn't at all feeling like it was going to be deprived. I was in the right headspace. And then as I came off that, I went into I'm going to eat early, high protein, low carb. I've been in ketosis for 3 weeks straight, and I've measured ketones in the past, and it's up and down. And one day I'm like, not, and then I am, this has been consistent. So yeah, because my experience is fitting in with what you're saying. And it's funny, isn't it? As soon as you start to do something, that reticular activating system is like, oh, you're hearing all these different things. So
absolutely. It sounds like you're doing a lot of things that can support healthy longevity across the board, honestly, from circadian nutrition to activating ketosis. And even, with fasting mimicking, we see that it's not just weight loss, but it's also muscle protection. Having adequate protein to support. I mean, you're doing it all. So I'm not surprised to see that you're getting the results that you're looking for. Now, in terms of the breakfast piece of everything, I think that it is so important that this is, especially when we're talking about fasting, right? That if you want to do a daily fast, even if it's 12 hours of fasting,
Mm-hmm.
the goal is, yes, that you would have your breakfast as early as possible based off of what you can achieve. Then if you hit that 12-hour mark and it's 7 p.m., try and have your dinner right before then. It might seem a little bit early, but that is really, really helpful as well. It's not just about having breakfast, but also about shifting up your dinner. It's twofold, and that is part of the circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm isn't just the first half of the day, it's all the 24 hours of the day. So it's based off of the way that our body changes throughout the day, the way that our cells kind of follow the daily patterns and what they're good at throughout different times of the day. Just like us, some of us are early morning people and we're really great at getting work done in the morning. Some of us are better in the evening. Our cells are really, they're a little bit better as morning people. They generally are. You wake up and we see a little bit of a cortisol rise, especially in women. And when we eat, it helps tamper that down. So that's really helpful to reduce that stress on your body early in the morning. And then later in the afternoon, actually our body is especially primed, interestingly, for exercise. And then in the evening, our body is kind of tired from all of the work it's done metabolizing food and energy throughout the day. And it turns out that our ability to take up sugar and manage blood sugar well in the evening is not very good. So if we are consuming a lot of food, especially high carbohydrate foods in the late evenings, our body just isn't going to be able to manage it as well. And it might lead to problems, especially if done frequently down the line, it can lead to problems. So that's just one piece of the puzzle that you're discussing here, but you can see how it all comes together.
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting that sometimes you just need the key to unlock one piece and it's like, aha, okay, that makes sense. Whereas that one piece for me, I've never done.
Yeah.
And I thought I've done all the other pieces, but they haven't quite worked without that one piece. So are you sort of saying then if you, I want to get a bit more into the details of the fasting mimicking in a sec, but if you were into the 16, 18 hour daily fast, you're better off having breakfast and fasting from there as opposed to skipping breakfast, skipping lunch and eating at one meal at night or lunch and dinner. You're better off doing breakfast lunch or breakfast afternoon, breakfast dinner.
Yes,
Is that
exactly.
Right?
Absolutely. So the best way to fast, if you are going to do daily 16, 18, even 14-hour fasting, have your breakfast, eat until your window is over, and have that shifted a little earlier. For most people, that would look like maybe a meal around 7:30 and your last meal around 6:30 even.
Yeah. Okay. And is that even more important for women? Like, I know that there's some difference between men and women in fasting because you said earlier that your cortisol spikes, especially for women in the morning. So is that even more important for a woman?
I would argue that, although the research I would say is medium there.
Okay.
I just noticed that women I find are more sensitive just based off of what I've seen in my more clinical experience. Now, in terms of differences between men and women with fasting, there are certainly some. We're starting to see more research starting to be done to try and understand where those differences are and specifically how fasting should be done differently for men and women. But even still today, although you will hear some physicians say that fasting, for example, for women who are still in their reproductive years should be done in the follicular phase versus the luteal, you'll hear almost as many saying the other. And there, for both of them, there is a reasonable description as to why they have given that recommendation based off of physiology, what we know the body does. But they've never actually studied it with fasting in women during different phases. So, we're making some assumptions until we can get really hard data. So unfortunately, when it comes to the differences in ways to fast between men and women, I think that we're pretty light, but I think for everybody, we should be shifting that fasting window earlier. And just because of that cortisol spike that I find is more pronounced or at least more impactful to women, then having that morning meal will help drop that.
Okay. And for women that are so my age, your perimenopausal women, are there added benefits or cautions, I suppose, for doing fasting mimicking at this stage of, a woman's life compared to, say in your 20s or 30s?
Well, certainly I'd say that for women entering either perimenopause or even menopause, then what we want to be cautious about are the changes that happen when estrogen drops and generally our reproductive hormones drop, because they are more than just reproductive hormones. They are connected to so many other processes in the body. So when they decline, we see other things change. For example, it's harder to maintain muscle because estrogen is really helpful with that. It is also harder to manage our blood sugar. And so for these reasons that we see these changes, it's really important that if we're going to implement nutrition changes, which is instinctually what many women do because they notice that perhaps their weight starts going up, even though they're doing the exact same thing, then we start looking for solutions. But it's really important that the solution doesn't make the problem worse. So when we look for a diet, for example, to help with this weight gain that is primarily caused by this drop in estrogen and therefore the drop in muscle and therefore the drop in metabolism and metabolic rate, we don't want that weight loss to be tapping into muscle. We don't want to be also losing muscle when we're losing weight because it's just going to create a vicious cycle. And so it's critical that we are choosing strategies that support that muscle. Fasting mimicking is one of the best ways that I have seen to get really quick weight loss while still protecting muscle. I also urge women that in between your fasting mimicking cycles to support with muscle or with enough protein to support weight-bearing exercise to promote muscle growth in between cycles as well. So that's one piece. And then also with fasting mimicking, we see consistently that it is helping all of these metabolic markers, from insulin resistance to HbA1c or just long-term measures of blood sugar to blood pressure to cholesterol and even measures of inflammation like CRP and otherwise. So those are all really important too. And then finally, I'll make a note on biological age. Our chronological age, we can't really do anything about that. That's the number on our birth certificate. Unless you know somebody that can fudge those numbers, there's really not much you can do. So what we do want to do, though, is change our biological age to be younger, the way that our body behaves, the way that our cells behave. And it can go either way, unfortunately, but we certainly want to help it go in the reduced biological age way. And with fasting mimicking, this has been clinically shown to reduce biological age with just 3 cycles. That's 5 days a month for 3 months, a 2.5-year biological age reversal. So this is huge.
Like I've got scales that measure that. I mean, I don't know how accurate they are. They're not like expensive scales, but they're scales that measure, all the things you don't really want to know, how much body percent fat you've got, like skeletal mass, blah, 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 blah. There's about 10 different things it measures. And, what did you say? Biological age? Yeah. And so it says I'm 55 and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got it. Like I feel like I'm 50. Oh, actually I'm almost 51 to be fair in 2 weeks. All right, I'm 51, but I'm not 55. So I'm like, right. Okay. So I don't know. Are they at all, do you want to be like, they're just bathroom scales, but you know.
So those bathroom scales, what they're using are typically they're measuring your body composition, your true age. Those are that I think is all that they're really able to measure. But what they're typically giving you is something that oftentimes we call it like a metabolic age. And so they're taking some markers that we might consider in a bigger biological age picture and giving you an estimate. So it's a start. And I don't necessarily think that the data is wrong per se, because there's lots of ways that we measure biological age. And there's unfortunately no official gold standard today. But it gives you a window and it gives you a starting point to see. And what it's probably saying, it's giving you a sense of the fat to muscle or lean mass ratio and saying this is looking a little off or it's looking good for based off of your true age. So it's still very valuable and as I mentioned, muscle is so critical and also unfortunately so easy to lose. From the moment we turn about 35, starts decreasing at about 1% a year and it increases around or a decade I should say. Around the age of 50, it increases even more. And then we see that it really becomes especially problematic once we hit around 65, where protein needs actually increase. So we have to be very, very cautious and mindful of that muscle, and we want to protect it at all costs.
So then, tell us a bit more, like in terms of fasting mimicking diet, you get to eat a bit. I mean, I know what I've done. I've kind of done a DIY version, which probably isn't, as good as like what's the official version? What's the, the optimal way of doing a 5-day fasting mimicking diet? What's sort of involved in like, what do you eat? Like all of that kind of thing. Give us a bit more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think people are doing the DIYs at home. And I think that I think it's cool that people are trying to create these at home. My only caveat there is that you do have to keep the total amount of food relatively low so that you don't risk going over those thresholds. Now, companies, there's a couple now, companies like Prolon or L-Nutra Health, they will make scientifically validated kits that give you breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack for every day for 5 days. That is actually quite a bit of food. You're hit on the first day, you get about 1,100 calories, and on the remaining days, you get about 700 or so. And you're getting whole foods on those days. So typically, what one of those days will look like is a nut-based breakfast bar. It even has a little bit of honey in there. Everything, by the way, tastes quite good. You then will transition to a snack that could be things like olives or crackers or things like that. The crackers are typically nut-based crackers with seeds and even kale or other vegetables in them. So they're not your typical grain crackers. Then you will transition to a plant-based soup. You'll probably have another snack. You'll have another soup, and then you'll have even a sweet at the end of the day. So it is a full day of food, and you're not just eating broths and teas. This is real ingredients. And again, fully validated with even studies on autophagy, confirming that we can activate that deep cellular cleanup on days 3 and 4, and even showing that you can achieve these drops in IGF-1 that are associated with these longer fasts, and really confirming that you're getting what you're looking for. That's why I like those official ones. But Dr. Walter Longo, who's the founder of Fasting Mimicking Diets, he wrote this book, and in the longevity diet,
the longevity diet, I was just saying it in case people aren't watching. The longevity diet,
Good catch. Yes, the longevity diet by Dr. Walter Longo, and he does give some suggestions for people who want to try and do it at home. I just caution, just make sure to, if you're going to do it, to be very, very cautious, because it's very easy to trip off those sensors, and you don't want to go 5 days and possibly not get the results you want.
Yeah, fair enough, because it is a bit more of a, well, I guess the benefit of buying it done for you is you don't have to think. You don't have to cook. You don't have to, you just, for 5 days, you don't have to think about it at all. You're getting all your nutrition. And I think probably the thing that stood out to me the first I heard of it, and I did read the longevity diet back, that was probably, my doctor does this, she'll say, right, there's this, you've got to do this. Here's the book, read the book, go figure it out. And so that's, so pretty much, which is good, because I like that, that sort of style of thing. So I did read the book, and I did try to figure it out. But I think that the key that I understood was that it was low calorie, so that 1,100, then 700-800 a day for the other 4 days. But it's totally vegan. There's no animal protein. You don't have bone broths. You're not like, yeah. So can you explain why that's so important?
Yes, absolutely. So when I was talking about those nutrient sensing pathways, those alarm bells on the cellular surface that are looking for food, there are specific nutrients that really tip them off much faster than others. And there's two really main categories that really trip off that sensor. And one is protein, especially animal-based proteins, because they have higher amounts of amino acids that really signal growth. And so they can trip off those sensors even more. And the other one is going to be simple sugars or easily refined carbohydrates. And those really trip things off too. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have any. So for example, in the fasting mimicking diets, you will still see a teensy bit of honey. You'll still see a little bit of protein, mostly from nuts and seeds. And so you'll still see some of those, but they're in very, very low quantities, enough to live below the sensor.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think what I found interesting, I mean, I could never be a vegan. I like my meat. I like having, a high animal based protein diet. But I thought that was what was really interesting, was that in order to give your body that break and for the autophagy and cell cleanup, you actually need a break, the animal proteins, which I thought was really interesting.
Absolutely. Well, I would say that for those who are consuming significant amounts of animal protein, a fasting mimicking diet periodically is even more important for you, because with animal protein, the reason why it kicks us out of a fast is because it's very good at stimulating growth. It's also why a lot of people who are really big into bodybuilding and really growing really big quickly will choose animal proteins first, because they really do stimulate that growth quite a bit. Now, it's more than just stimulating muscle growth, though, that they're doing. They're also stimulating growth all around. And sometimes what is happening is that the body is just creating so much that it ends up just creating a bunch of waste. I kind of like to think of it in my home analogy that, the food that we consume is kind of like cash in hand, and we get a bunch of cash and we take that cash and we go buy things. We go buy things for our home. And, you only have so big of a home where eventually things just start accumulating all over the place. And if you just keep buying things and keep buying things, it's going to become a little bit messy, and some of that stuff isn't going to work so well. You need to take a moment to take some of those things out so that you can replace it, so that you're not overwhelming the space. And that's kind of the same thing with, if we're constantly stimulating growth at the cellular level and beyond, we need to take time to clear it out too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that. And I can see how doing that on that whatever kind of regular basis, semi-regular basis, it just gives your body a rest. It certainly this time, I guess because it's fresh in my mind, it just felt like a whole digestive system cleanse as well. Like it's just like, okay, I'm cleaned out. But I wasn't hungry at all. I think I was in the right headspace, and I do think that certainly helped. But really, I was surprised for the whole 5 days until it sort of got to lunchtime on the Friday, and my husband saying, well, why don't you just join us for steak and chips for dinner? And I'm like, because it was Friday nights for steak and chips for dinner. I'm like, well, I don't finish till tomorrow. And then all Friday afternoon, all I could think of was steak and chips. And then I was hungry. But for the rest of the time, really wasn't hungry. I was having like a nut bar in the morning and then basically vegetable soup, for lunch and dinner. That's basically what I was doing. Yeah, and I really wasn't hungry, but felt quite cleansed, Yeah. So it was good.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say a couple of things in terms of the gut reset. We don't have a lot of data there just for generally healthy people, but we do have some early research on fasting mimicking in IBD or inflammatory bowel disease. And what we've seen here in mice models is that there is not only improvement in the gut microbiome, meaning that there's an increase in lacto and bifidobacteria, but also that there is regeneration and rebuilding of the gut lining, which is deteriorated in this condition. And so it really, it seems from this early research that there could be some really great opportunity there for gut health, even in healthy individuals. And so I always think that that's just an added benefit beyond all of the other benefits, like the metabolic benefits, like the biological age. I mean, I didn't even touch on some of the skin health benefits, but when we kind of get out of our body's way, we let it do its work that it has evolved to do over, this thousands and thousands of years, then you'd be amazed at how much it can do across the board, especially when we're working at this root cause approach from the cellular level.
And so when you're doing a 5-day fasting mimicking diet, should you be exercising?
Generally, we recommend that people move, so walk, stretch, things like that. But my rule of thumb is if you're breaking a sweat, you've probably gone too far. Now, there's a lot of things that can add stress to your body, and generally these things that I'm going to name are positive stress, but so is fasting. It's a positive stress, and again, too much of a good thing can just be too much on your body. So excessive exercise, cryotherapy, ice baths, infrared saunas, those are all things that probably are going to just add too much stress to your body, especially if you're just getting started into the world of fasting and fasting mimicking. Then I would just urge a little bit of caution with pushing a little too hard.
Yeah. So save those for afterwards, the other three weeks of the month. Okay. And when you're coming, is there anything you should do going in and then out of those 5 days?
So with fasting mimicking, the beauty of this is that it's designed to be no prep and no official exit requirements. Now, that being said, I do have especially strong recommendations for the exit. Your body has gone through and has really gotten used to this really clean plant-based program. So I would urge, avoid excess simple sugar. Even on that first day, limiting really heavy animal protein. So maybe going for, if you want to go for animal proteins, go for like a chicken or a fish or something like that. Transitioning also for some people, they might even want to start with a little bit more liquids and then transition more into the more heavy fibrous your foods for later on, even that evening. You don't necessarily need to wait several days. It's really just that first day kind of gradually transitioning. But and then also alcohol, of course, limiting that as well. And on that first day 0 or before you start, a lot of the same applies. Although I will add a couple of things for prep that I've noticed can help individuals. One being reducing the amount of caffeine intake before entering into your fast. You can still consume coffee on these programs. Usually we recommend to keep it about 140 milligrams of caffeine daily or less. That's usually about 1 to 2 cups of coffee, but with nothing in it. Do not put sugar.
No milk. No. Yeah.
But trying to reduce coffee intake if you find that you're having more than that before, or trying to, handle your coffee without those added pieces before, can take one less thing to worry about during the 5 days. And then last but not least is that some people find that getting into a little bit more of that ketosis state a little bit earlier, so a little less carbohydrates prior. Some people find that that helps as they enter into the program because they may not notice some of the discomfort of shifting from burning sugar to burning fat, which because your body loves burning sugar so much and it loves using sugar so much, it's way easier for it. It can throw a bit of a tantrum when for the first couple of times you're forcing it to switch if it's not used to doing that, which for many people, believe it or not, we're never really fasting for long enough to really do this in any meaningful way so that it can be a little uncomfortable the first time.
Okay. And when you're saying uncomfortable, is there any, like, would there be any warning signs that you think, oh, you really should stop? Like you start and something, I mean, I guess you've got to use your own, be sensible. But, like given that people can have those sort of detoxy, keto flu-y kind of, negative responses, how negative is too negative to where you think, oh, actually, you probably should stop? Like, is there
There
some warning
definitely is.
signs?
For sure. So, I mean, everything should be mild and short lived. If it is no longer mild and if it is not short lived, and by short lived, I mean like under an hour, really, then you should consider discontinuing. Now, this is incredibly rare with fasting mimicking. Fasting mimicking is specifically designed to reduce or completely eliminate adverse outcomes. So in all of the studies, they always measure adverse outcomes. And what they find is that they are all incredibly mild. So things that you might capture are going to be things like light headache or lightheadedness or maybe a little bit of nausea. But usually this should dissipate within, I mean, I even notice like minutes, but for some people it could take, maybe up to an hour. Now, if that headache becomes a migraine, that's very different. If that headache is every day for like all day for 2 days, that's a problem. If Advil or Tylenol or whatever, you typically use doesn't make it go away. These are things that, would be even just that a red flag. Nausea is okay maybe for very short lived, under an hour, but if it's longer than that, and certainly if you notice any vomiting, then that would be problematic. Again, you almost never see those things, but that's where it's just that difference between the very mild and short lived to the significant and not short.
Yeah, fair enough. And that, so use your own discretion. But if you just got a bit of a headache, press on through and see how you feel. Because like you say, if the real benefits kick in at that sort of day 3-4 kind of mark, that's where you really at least want to get to if you can. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, I urge people get through all the way through the end of day 5, meaning into the morning of day 6. I love your story of your husband tempting you with the steak and chips, because my husband does that to me without fail almost every round he's not participating in. And occasionally on the rounds that he does participate in, he will stop on the evening of the Friday or the last day. And I urge anybody who works with me to push through the morning of day 6, because if you have worked so hard to get to day 3 where things are really actually turning on, you don't want to just start your spring cleaning and stop after an hour. You're not really going to get very far. You want to go until the house is fully clean. And that really does take until the morning of the 6th. And if we're seeing it really turn on and activate on day 3, you need to live in that for at least a couple of days. I just urge people to remember that they're just really kickstarting it on days 3, 4.
Yeah. So
and
stick it through.
Also, that fasting is the easiest when you're sleeping. So take advantage of the fact that you're going to get an extra 8 hours while you're in bed, and then you can enjoy a really incredible breakfast the next morning.
Yeah. So that was so funny because that night I've got to share. So sitting around the table, everyone else is eating steak and chips. I've got my vegetable soup, and I'd made a pot at lunch, and then so it was the same pot, like same lunch and dinner. It was just easier to do it that way. And then I sat down, and some flies had got in to the soup. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the last meal. I'm like, oh, I'm good. I thought there was like 4 or 5 flies in my soup, and I'm like, okay. And they're like, there's your protein. I'm like, no. So I tipped that out. I'm like, what am I going to eat now? I can't eat steak and chips. And I ended up, I've always got different bone broths and things in the freezer. So I ended up just having some chicken stock, some chicken, just plain chicken soup, which I thought, I know that's got the protein, but it's still the soup. And I think that's the best option I've got at the moment. It's certainly better than steak and chips. And I was like, oh my gosh, there was such a, it was like, really the last meal?
I have heard so many horror stories of people like forgetting about their soup in over the stove and it boils over and they have no, so watch those things
Watch
very
the soup.
carefully.
Pay attention. That's right. So Renee, like if people were, not wanting to, well, from my recollection, the longevity diet does give some tips around a DIY version. That's my recollection. Is that right?
It does, yeah. It's
Yeah.
short, but it is there. It's really just I wonder if I can pull it up. Probably not that fast, but
No, that's okay.
it's really just half a page of some suggestions on maybe the vegetables that you would select. It's not a lot. I think that's honestly part of the reason why I'm the most fearful of doing the DIY, because it's very loosely defined, and knowing that our cells don't define it very loosely, that's where I get a little iffy. But as you mentioned, the most important things are to really keep protein low and to keep those simple sugars low. So that's why you see a lot of vegetables, and primarily green leafy vegetables and broccoli and things like that are listed as the recommended option.
Yeah. And look, obviously, I'm assuming that the studies have been on the predetermined, like the packet, the 5-day package, so you know exactly what you're getting. And so, I mean, given like that, I haven't had that experience. So, like, where do people go to get these packages? Like, yeah, tell us a little bit about what what you offer. How, if people were interested in that, where do they go? What do they do?
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, there's 2 companies that are doing it right now. One is called L-Nutra Health. L-Nutra Health is incredible because not only do they support with the fasting mimicking diet already ready to go, delivered to your door, but they also add lab work, medication management. They include dietitian visits and physician visits and all the extra bells and whistles to make sure that everything is done well. It's especially helpful for individuals who are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, prediabetes. If your doctor has said, your blood pressure is looking like it's getting elevated, or your cholesterol numbers are looking a little scary right now, these would be the individuals that I would strongly recommend explore the L-Nutra Health world. There is also Prolon. Prolon is going to be your recommendation for individuals who are generally healthy, looking for longevity, looking for maybe a couple of pounds off, but not a significant weight loss, but just, some light weight loss here and there. Optimization, prevention. That's going to be the world of Prolon, where they have designed the kit, ships to your door, and you're off to the races. So
that you got the deluxe and the basic kind of option. Exactly. And I suppose going back to what we said at the very beginning, for this audience with thyroid conditions, if you are a little hesitant, and maybe you've got a few other things going on, sounds like that the L-Nutra option could be worth exploring, because it sounds like it's got scaffolded with that extra kind of support.
Especially for those who maybe that your diet outside of the 5-day protocol might need some guidance or support, or you have any hesitancy or concern. I mean, it's a really, really great option for sure. So yeah, I've definitely been leaning on that option a lot more. The L-Nutra Health programs are currently only available in some areas of Europe and in the United States at the moment. Prolon is available at this point, almost worldwide. Definitely, I know we have locations in Australia, certainly.
Yeah, I knew. Yeah, definitely.
Europe, all the spots.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you, Renee. Like I could probably keep talking for a while about fasting and food and all of that because it's right where I'm at the moment. So, but I've enjoyed this conversation. It's been really helpful for me, and I hope really interesting and engaging for those of you listening. And if you go to give it a try, let me know. Join my Let's Talk Thyroid Facebook community if you're not already there, and tell me if you're going to do it, and if you do, how you find it. So, Renee, if people did want to connect with you specifically, like what's the best way for people to do that?
Absolutely. If you would like to connect with me directly, honestly, the fastest, easiest way is on Instagram. You can find me at Fitton Nutrition. That's Fitton Nutrition. I also have a website, fittonnutrition.com. And then if you are interested in either of those two programs, Prolon is Prolon Life, Prolon life.com. And L-Nutra Health is L-Nutra, Nutra health.com. And both have a lot of really great resources on fasting and fasting mimicking.
Excellent. Well, thank you for diving into that world with me. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Thyroid. If you have enjoyed the content, or perhaps you're thinking, oh, my mum needs to hear this, or my sister, or my bestie, I would love it if you would share this episode with them. That really just helps spread the positive and practical message of Let's Talk Thyroid, and helps that broader thyroid community, our friends and family, to live well with their thyroid health. So you can just share the episode. If you subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast, it's free. It's really helpful because then you'll be notified every time a new podcast comes out, and it just makes it much easier to find. There's usually a little subscribe button or a bell, or follow often is the terminology. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, that would be helpful. Of course, if you want to leave a review, even better, just a sentence or two about how the podcast has helped you. You can definitely connect with me via letstalkthyroid.com. That's where you'll find access to my book, my coaching, my freebies, and really everything that I offer in terms of thyroid support. So thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye.